Hey everyone, thank you for joining us for the FMCSA Clearinghouse webinar today with Holly Rainwater, our Vice President of Drug and Alcohol Programs. We're grateful that you took time out of your busy schedule to learn a little bit more about the Clearinghouse. We hope that it's useful for you. I'll pass it along to Holly.
Good afternoon or good morning, depending on the time zone you're in. I am Holly Rainwater, and as Katie said, I'm the Vice President of the Drug and Alcohol Programs for Spark. And one of the big questions that came up at a couple of the conferences that Katie and I were at was, tell us more about the Clearinghouse. And I thought, okay, we can do this. And we went in and I thought, oh my goodness, there's a lot. We're going to hit really high level today on just the basics of the Clearinghouse. And I would encourage you, if you have questions or maybe would like to have follow-up webinars after this, please let us know so we can ensure that we are providing you the information that really can help us and help you do your jobs better. With the Clearinghouse, what we're going to do today is give you an overview of the Clearinghouse, how to register, talk about the queries and the consent that is required, talking a little bit about reporting violations. I'm not going to go into that too far, but we'll talk about some of our responsibilities to report those violations. Next steps, a little more info, and provide you additional resources. I'm going to put this disclaimer out there. This is a summary of the regulation. It's not the official rule. It's for presentation purposes. We're not interpreting the rule, but giving you information regarding the rule. The Clearinghouse, it was mandated by Congress in 2016. It was published, and there's a full text regulation from the regulation in Part 382. It did establish the requirements of the Clearinghouse, and the Clearinghouse was implemented on January 6th, 2020. If you haven't already, the date that the Clearinghouse did become effective was on January 6th. Who needs to be in the Clearinghouse? I'm not going to read all of this, but anybody who is a CDL driver who operates a commercial motor vehicle on public roads should be covered or is covered under that Clearinghouse regulation. If you've got anybody that does do any of these, has a license in this area, they would be covered under the Clearinghouse. This again is in the handouts, so you can review that later. Here's a quick overview too of the different types of CDL licenses. The purpose of the Clearinghouse really is to maintain a list of drug and alcohol violations that any FMCSA or CDL driver may have occurred during their time of employment or during that pre-employment process for becoming a driver. Additionally, it does also cover any of the follow-up testing or return to duty processes following a violation. What the Clearinghouse has, and I do also want to mention, a lot of the slides, like this slide itself, were taken directly from FMCSA. FMCSA has done an excellent job of preparing information and putting information out for employers, TPAs, for drivers on exactly how to use the Clearinghouse. I do want to give credit to FMCSA for that, for part of this presentation. But the Clearinghouse allows you for employers to report and record their drivers. It retains that national database, and it allows employers and TPAs to do a query annually and upon pre-employment. Violations, again, these are all 382 violations under FMCSA: positive tests, alcohol above a 0.04, refusals, actual knowledge, on-duty use, pre-duty use, alcohol use, and controlled substance use as well. And that return to duty process is with that substance abuse professional, or SAP as we commonly refer to them, the return to duty drug test, and the employer's completion of follow-up testing. What that means is if somebody has that violation, let's say if it's a drug violation, the MRO is actually going to log into the Clearinghouse and report that violation. I believe it's within 3 days of that violation, 2 or 3 days of that violation. Then the employee is going to go in, or that driver will go in, assign a substance abuse professional to him. that substance abuse professional will go in, accept that case, go in and put in the information regarding that substance abuse process. When they've completed that process, the employer goes in, enters that return to duty negative drug test, and then will file the completion of the follow-up testing. Those type of things are what's in here. Some things that you're going to do as an employer: first, you will register with the clearinghouse. If you haven't done, that's something you're going to need to do. When you go in there, you will go ahead and authorize one person to be that point person. You'll provide your DOT numbers when you go in, identify your service agents, and for those that are owner operators that maybe just have their self as the driver, they're required to have a TPA as their designee. This is just a quick peek at when you go into the clearinghouse, when you register, what it looks like. And if you log in, select your role, if you're the employer, the driver, the TPA, the MRO, etc. You select your role, and then you can create your account. You want to make sure there's different roles inside the clearinghouse. There's a drug and alcohol clearinghouse motor carrier role that can query and report. We're going to talk more about queries in a little bit. But then there's also an admin role that can query, report, and then designate TPAs and indicate carriers as well. And I would recommend, before you go in to register, if you don't have that DOT number, have that in advance, because it will really make your smoother process when you go through. Some people do have a TPA that does go in and actually perform the queries. If you're going to designate a TPA to do that for you, what this says is really just make sure that TPA knows that they're going to be doing that, but you'll have to go ahead and assign them as that TPA. So the TPA will have to go into the clearinghouse first and register that they're actually a TPA that can do that, and then the TPA can go in and perform that information. Again, with owner operators, they have to have a TPA, so they can't go in there and put their own return to duty information in there, their own violations. They have to have a TPA do that. They also have assistants that can help. It's not just one person doing all of that work, but there's just other roles in here. Let me just make this a little smaller here. I apologize for that. Really, the clearinghouse, and I guess one way to look at the clearinghouse is the intent to help with that 40.25 process. With that being said, the FMCSA in their safety performance history records checks requires a 3-year look at a person's drug and alcohol program record. The clearinghouse will eliminate in 2023 the need for FMCSA drivers to use paper chain of custodies if they're querying people that only worked FMCSA work. It's going to really help just with that FMCSA portion. On the FRA side, you still have to query any FRA regulated employers. If you're going to be a FRA employer, but you're going to hire an FMCSA employee, you'll be able to just do that look in the clearinghouse if they were only designated or worked under FMCSA rules and regulations. Employers, when they query, they'll have to log into the clearinghouse and query current and prospective employees before you allow them to operate a commercial motor vehicle on public roads. Additionally, you're required annually to do a query to ensure that they haven't had any violations in that rolling 12-month calendar year. All queries do require driver consent. And FMCSA, again, I'm going to give them a lot of credit because they did do a good job here. They did put a sample form out on the website. Here's a kind of peek at it that will allow you to do this limited query. We'll talk about that a little bit more, but this allows them to go in and have a blanket query that you would keep on file in that driver record that says, yes, I allow you to do a query on me annually. When we go into the types of queries, this is where it gets a little confusing, but hopefully I can try to make it make a little more sense. There's 2 queries. There's a limited query and a full query. The limited query is what you're going to use on an annual basis. It satisfies that annual requirement, and you can use that consent form for multiple years and multiple queries. When you're doing that MVR annually, you're also going to do this query annually. Now there's the full query. The full query actually goes a little bit deeper. That satisfies the pre-employment requirement. And pre-employment doesn't necessarily mean a new hire. Pre-employment is anybody performing FMCSA CDL duties for that first time. When that person is going to be a driver for the first time for you, you'll go into the clearinghouse, do a full query. Another time that you would do that is if you do an annual query and you get a hit. I'll call it a hit, but you'll do a full query and you get a hit, and then you'll do a limited query, you'll get a hit, and that'll require you to go in and do a full query. This is a little bit on the limited query here. You have to get the consent. If they don't give you consent, you can't do the query. If you do that annual query, don't find anything, then there's no action required. But if you do a limited query and you find that hit, you must do a full query within 24 hours. Otherwise, that driver cannot perform safety sensitive duties. When they get the consent for that full query, it's a little bit different. It's not like that annual query where you can use that sample form. The driver actually has to go into the clearinghouse, allow the opportunity for you to go and get consent to pull the full query as the employer, and then you'll do that full query. Again, that has to be done within 24 hours. If you don't do it within 24 hours, then that person has to be performed from safety sensitive duties and they cannot drive that CDL. If they say, hey, I don't know what you found, I'm not doing it, but I gotta go drive, you can't let them. If they refuse to have that consent, you do need to act upon it. As an employer, I would encourage you to think about when you pull your queries. If you're pulling your queries Friday afternoon at 3 o'clock and you have someone that you do your limited query, you have a hit, you have to make sure within 24 hours by Saturday afternoon, you have to have that full query completed. Please keep in mind when you're doing your queries so that just will make your job a little bit easier. Again, here's a look at that full query. Again, pre-employment or prospective, or if you found a record on a limited query, all full queries are done, consented electronic in the clearinghouse. So you please make sure that you understand the difference. The clearinghouse actually does have, and you'll see this as well, some checks and balances to make sure that, it reminds you, hey, you needed to get this consent. It verifies the consent is there. And I'll show you those as well. There is a charge to the clearinghouse for doing that query. Employers are charged a fee for conducting those queries. TPAs cannot go in and purchase queries on behalf of other employers. TPAs can't go in and buy a big bulk of queries to do that. It has to be done based upon that employer. If you have 50 employees, then you would buy 50 queries for that, whatever year, however you want to do it. And note that they don't expire, but you do know that they do have to be purchased. And if you have multiple DOT numbers under your clearing or under your DOT model, each employer or each DOT number has to have its own queries purchased under that. So if you're a holding company and you've got 3 DOT numbers under you, each DOT number has to have queries purchased under each specific DOT number. But when you go in to buy your queries, it's actually going to have a query summary. You're going to know how many you've conducted, how many you've got left. It actually has your receipt on there. When you go in to do the query, it allows you to put that first name, last name, date of birth, that CDL number, the country of issuance and the state of issuance for the driver. And that's about all of this is that there is a specific number that's used that's consistent across the board, and that's that CDL number and the state of issuance. When you look at the drug testing side, when you're doing an FMCSA pre-employment test or any FMCSA testing, that CDL number and state of issuance is the ID number on that chain of custody, not an employee ID number, not a social security number, it's that CDL. The reason for that is if there's a drug positive, as an employer, you're not going to go in and put in that positive test, but your MRO is required to do that. But if your MRO goes in and they don't have a driver's license number or CDL number, and they have an employee ID number, they can't do their job correctly to report that to the clearinghouse. Make sure if you have your collectors using that right information on the forms. But you'll see in here, you can go in and you can purchase your limited query. You can do the order the full query. It's got all of these checks and balances all the way through, which I thought was really very helpful. It'll show you too, if you go through and you do not find I keep calling it a hit, but if you don't find any information that would prohibit that person from doing safety sensitive functions, it's going to say, give you that check, yep, everything's complete. But if they found a record where it does require a full query, it does going to go ahead and give you that error message, or that, hey, yield, stop, take a look at what you got to do. It'll allow you to send the consent request to that driver. That goes to the driver. The driver's actually going to go in and say, hey, yep, I'm going to give you consent to do this. And here's where the driver actually goes into the clearinghouse and says, I consent to this, or I don't consent to this. They can actually see what violations are in their driver log. And that's a whole nother topic, is as a driver, what they see, those type of things. And here's actually a look at the queries. This is
Hey everyone, I see that Holly's video froze. Hang tight, thank you.
I apologize for that. Can you
Yes.
hear me now, Katie? Okay, I am so sorry. Okay, sorry about that. Again, here's, I don't know how, let's see here. This is where you put the driver, let's see. Actually, this is the view of that violation history. Here is actually where you can go in and report a violation. This actually is for an employer. This is if they're going to go ahead and put in like a positive alcohol test. You can go in here as an employer. You're going to put in the information you have knowledge about for a violation, like an alcohol test, a refusal on actual knowledge, like having alcohol in their vehicle when they're working, those type of things, any refusals or actual knowledge of a drug or alcohol violation. Those are things that you'll put in here. And then if it's got a refusal, it's going to tell you, here's why you had the refusal. You refused to remain at the testing site. All of that information does go right into that clearinghouse, so you know what the heck happened, why they have that violation. Then it'll have you go in and submit it. The other piece is on this side of it, these are the things that you can have a TPA do on your behalf. If you designated a TPA to put in all of your alcohol violations or refusals, those are things that a TPA can assist you with. I do want to note too, one more thing is that the violations that are going in here are only FMCSA. I've said that several times, but let's just say you have I'm going to just do a signal maintainer. The signal maintainer potentially could be under FMCSA and could be under FRA. And you have a random and they're selected for an FRA random. When they have that violation, they'll have, let's just say that they're going to have a positive alcohol violation above a 0.04. That will not go in the clearinghouse because even though they are a driver, that test was under FRA authority, so it doesn't go into the clearinghouse. Make sure that you're watching that. It's very important especially now, to make sure that you are doing the right DOT authority. Clearinghouse payments, just high level. When you buy a query, you can put them on MasterCard, Visa, American Express. They don't do invoices or purchase orders. Employers must purchase the plan, TPAs cannot. Each company must have its own query plan that we talked about. Questions that do come up are with violations. Anything that happened before January 6th, so that onset was before January 6th, is not in the clearinghouse. Somebody had a violation on January 1, 2020, that's not in the clearinghouse. So anything FMCSA violations after January 6th, 2020 should all be in the clearinghouse. Violations are in the clearinghouse for 5 years or until that follow-up testing plan is successfully completed, or whichever is later. Can an MRO or employer report a drug or alcohol program violation if a driver is not registered for the clearinghouse? Yes, and this is where that driver's license is important. The clearinghouse will associate the violation with the driver's CDL information. It will be recorded even if the driver has not registered for the clearinghouse. That's why those driver's license numbers are so important. If you haven't registered already, that's one of the biggest things you need to go is if you go into the clearinghouse, you can go in and register. You can put all of your DOT information in there. You will find so many links, so many handouts, so much information in there that can provide you a little bit more research and information on that clearinghouse. They do have emails that you can contact and phone numbers. Again, we're dealing with DOT, so you might not be able to get through as quickly as possible, but they do have some great resources. Katie, maybe now, I don't know if anybody's got questions. I feel like I talked a lot and went through a lot. Are there any questions that I can answer or?
So we have a couple questions. One is the clearinghouse, the FMCSA clearinghouse. Is this only for CDL licensed drivers?
It's anybody, yeah, it's anybody who's going to fall under that portion. It's going really fast through here to get back to this. It's anybody who operates a CMV that's under this part of the regulation. Let's say that you're sending a driver in and they're driving a vehicle that's 26,000 pounds. Part of that qualification of a driver is to have a federal pre-employment test. Then for a drug test, that person would be required to be in the clearinghouse. Now, make it a little more complicated. So let's just say we've got somebody over here that is driving a vehicle that's 10,001 pounds, okay? They don't need to be in the clearinghouse because that drug and alcohol requirement is not required. They need to have a med card, but they don't need to be in the clearinghouse because they're not under that drug and alcohol requirement. It's really anybody.
Yeah, go ahead, Holly, finish. I'm sorry.
Yep, that's okay. It's anybody that has that potential of driving a vehicle with gross motor vehicle weight of 26,001 pounds or higher, or is transporting more than 8 passengers, transporting someone with more than 15 passengers like in a van, or transporting materials that could be considered hazardous.
Just a question to follow up on that. The signal maintainer example, let's say you have a signal maintainer who has a CDL, percentage of their work is under FRA. They're in your FRA random pool. Just how would there be the pre-employment and FMCSA, or how would a railroad handle that?
Good question. So that's really like a two-part question. The first is you actually will need to make sure that you're compliant under both modes. You hire that person under FRA, you'll have that FRA pre-employment drug test. They'll be in the FRA pool. They will also be in, have the educational material. But 2 months down the road, you said, okay, now you're going to start driving a CDL vehicle. Then they'll have to go in and take an FMCSA drug test for pre-employment. Then you'll need to determine which pool they are in. If they're performing more than 51% of their work under FRA, they'd be an FRA. If they're doing more than 51% of their work in FMCSA, then they fall under FMCSA. Does that answer that question, Katie?
Yeah, I just wanted to talk it through because that's so frequent with railroads, and we've got a bunch of railroaders on the call. If you have that signal maintainer, both pre-employments are, I'm just gonna repeat it. Both pre-employments are required, right? And then the pool is based on where they spend the majority of their time, 51% or more. And then if, let's say they're just a CDL 20%, CDL driver 20% of the time, do you still do the annual check in the clearinghouse for that CDL license?
Exactly. So if they're still going to be qualified as a driver, you will still need to do that annual query under FMCSA. So you'll do the annual query and any other of the requirements under 391, I think it's 391, with the driver qualification file. Some of that is doing that safety performance records check with just going back that year, looking at their whether or not they've had a motor vehicle violation, those type of things.
Gotcha. And then you had mentioned that a TPA can enter the violations. Can a TPA perform those queries on behalf of the employer, or is that something the employer has to do?
A TPA can do the queries on behalf of an employer. They just cannot buy the query. They can't go in and purchase that query on behalf of the employer. They can go in and underneath, and if they're designated by an employer, they can do that work for them. They can pull a query annually and do that limited and then full query.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Feel free to check them or put them in the question box. I'm not seeing anything else right now, Holly.
Okay.
If additional questions you guys think about it after the webinar, feel free to email us. Holly, do you have a slide with our info?
I do. Went a little fast. Yes, here's my info's here, holly@sparkts.net. And really just wanted to remind everyone about some of the things that we are with Spark. Yeah. But my email's here. You can email Katie or myself, and we'd be more than happy to provide more information or answer any questions that we have.
Thank you. I'll just add to that before we end that I see a lot of you on the webinar today are currently using Railtasker for efficiency tests and 243 training and field testing. I just want to mention that if you haven't seen what we're building and what we have available right now for drug and alcohol, let Holly or I know. We'd be happy to show you. We're adding, right now you can order your tests, your drug and alcohol tests online, get those electronic chain of custodies. Very soon we're going to have an onboarding dashboard, which we're really excited about. And then not far behind that, a randomizer too.
Thank you.